Hello and welcome to the Categorically Romance podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Bree.
And joining us today, we have author Rebecca Hunter with us. We're so happy to have you join us today. Please tell us how your 2022 has been.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so I'm so honored to be here. In 2022, so I got to see my sister for the first time in years because she lives in Australia and she wasn't allowed to come, or actually, she was allowed to come, but she wasn't allowed to go back if she did.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And then we did this whole these family gatherings with different groups of relatives. And we also got to go up to, we have a family cottage in Ontario, and we couldn't go there for 2 summers because of COVID restrictions. So I'm giving 2022 a cautious thumbs up and hoping there isn't a reason to change my answer soon.
No late game surprises for us.
Right.
Yes. Just smooth sailing.
Well, are you ready to get into some icebreakers?
Yes.
If you came with a warning label, what would it say?
Mine would say, watch for strong opinions. So my friends tend to think of me as a pretty easygoing person, and I don't tend to sweat the smell of stuff. So then I think it can take people by surprise when I can be strong-worded and strongly opinionated about the things I do feel very passionately about.
Okay, so give us one of your strong opinions.
Well, they tend to be big scale things, no one in the world should go hungry, and we should be doing everything we can to stop that. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, but I can be a little single-minded when I say things. And it can take people by surprise, I think.
It's one of those don't get me started.
Yes,
How you have to preface with that. Yeah.
I am that person. You have to warn, okay, take it easy on this.
On your website, one place you've listed as calling home is Stockholm, Sweden. Share with us one of the things you enjoyed about having lived there.
There's so many things, like cinnamon rolls. But I'm gonna go with, so Midsummer is this celebration that happens on the longest day of the year. And we often would spend it with friends. And so you just stay up all night and you gather around an enormous outdoor table, and kids and adults, and there's eating and drinking, and there can be singing and dancing, and it's nutty and lots of fun. So I'm going to say, I think Midsummer is the top of the list.
I love that so much.
It's great too, because it really, it happens at the beginning of the summer. So it's like the time it kind of kicks off the summer too. And everyone just, it's the whole night. So yeah, because it is light for almost all of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So much fun. What's the last song to get stuck in your head?
Well, so we live in a tiny house, and the other 3 members of my family all play instruments. So it's always anything that gets stuck in my head is usually something they're playing because they're practicing the song over and over. So last night, my son was playing Brown Eyed Girl. So that's it, I think.
Oh, okay.
What would your elevator pitch for the kind of romances you enjoy writing be?
I'm going to say sexy, witty, international romance with emotional depth and complexity. I'm not sure if that's specific enough, but
I think that's great.
I think that works just fine.
Yeah.
Well, we love to hear romance origin stories. Can you share with us how you became a romance reader and writer?
Sure. So I grew up in a house that was very much dedicated to literary fiction. And I've always been a voracious reader, and I didn't have any complaints. Though looking back, I can see that the books that I read during my teens were written almost exclusively by men, often white men. And I don't think my parents really considered that angle of it. There was a little Sweet Valley High that found its way in there, but basically, I didn't read romance until I was an adult. And so I actually became a romance reader and writer around the same time. I had written one book. It was a mystery, and it's one that no one will ever see. But I wasn't convinced that I was a very good match for the genre, because, for example, I don't like writing or reading violence, and so then writing it takes longer than reading. So that was one of the clues that that wasn't really going to be my home genre. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really wanna kill anybody.
it's funny because even with even in romance, when I write romance, I tend to like steer away from the hardest times for the characters. And my friend, who's my beta reader, she's always like, "No, you've got to go for it." But so it's a problem. But my sister visited me in Sweden, and she gave me a book. And at the time, like when I was living in Sweden, like it's hard to get a hold of English language books. And this was before Amazon was, king of everything. And she gave me the book that she had just finished, which was Outlander.
Oh my
And
gosh.
Oh.
is
There
that
it is.
Yeah.
is that a thumbs up O or a thumbs down no?
I mean, it's a thumbs up, but that's a big book to get started with.
And there's not just one of them. Yeah. Well, so I read it and there were things that I liked and there were things that I didn't like as much. But what really blew me away was the distance between what I assumed romance was without reading it, of course. And what the book really was, what it actually was. And it was right around then that I first thought like, oh, I have stories that I could write that might be romances. And maybe that's a better idea than mystery. So that's really kind of where it started.
Yeah, Aaron and I have been trying our hand at writing, and we're pretty much on the same page. Like, we kind of find it hard to be mean to the characters, but we know that
Absolutely.
that's something you have to do. So just hearing you say that, it's like you're speaking to the choir, like, right now.
It's funny because now, so since I've switched over to mostly traditional publishing, I have to write a summary before I go into the book. And it's actually easiest for me to, in the summary part, realize, okay, I have not put enough like conflict and peril in the relationship in there because it's really hard when I'm in the thick of it to torture the characters. I don't want them
Yeah.
to have a hard time.
Okay, so I have to ask, so having with when you read Outlander and you said there was a lot of things you liked, there were a lot of things you didn't. Like, how did it change your perspective of romance? I remember when I was trying my hand at blogging, y'all, I made a post and I included Outlander in it because at the time it was a book I really wanted to read. And somebody like gave me this comment about this is not a romance and blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, everybody that I know that reads romance that has read this book considers it a romance. So like as that being your first, how did it change your perspective of the genre?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there was a lot of other things. There's a lot of other things going on in that story besides the romance. The sort of the time travel and what it would be like for someone from the middle of the 1900s to go there. And there was a lot that was super intriguing. I think, I only read the first one, and that one I would venture to say I don't have a super strong opinion about this, so this is not one of my hills
Okay.
I but I think the first one is a complete romance, and it was definitely presented like this is long before I was in RWA, but when it first came out, it was given to at the National RWA conference. Her publisher put it in like all the rooms. Like it was definitely at the time marketed as a romance. I think it then, like, if you start to get after that, it goes into like adventure with romantic subplot. But that first one, like they have a happily ever after or a happily for now, maybe at the end of that book. So I don't know. I would say that one is a romance, but it really did not take the course. There was so much adventure in it and so much about Claire's story, like her I would say it's kind of even an intersection. It's got a women's fiction element to it because it's really about her self-exploration through this story. So I think that really appealed to me. And that's sort of how I entered romance too.
Well, from what we could see online, your first published title was Stockholm Diaries, Caroline, which you indie published in 2015. So, can you take us back to this time and walk us through the writing and publishing of this book?
Sure. So I was stuck revising the same mystery manuscript many times.
The under the
That
bed mystery that we will never see.
I wasted 3 years of my life on. But and I was submitting it to agents, and after I had gotten a lot of people would take it and they'd ask for more and sometimes even a full, and then just say I don't love this enough to buy it or to take it. So then I came to the decision that I really needed to start again. And once I read Outlander, I started devouring romance, historical romance first, because that was sort of like my gateway in. But in 2013, our family moved from Stockholm to where we currently live, which is the San Francisco Bay Area. And I missed so many things about Sweden. So when I sat down to write Diaries, Caroline, it really it's sort of like a love letter to my expat friends and the city I loved and the things I loved about it. So there's a ton of personal things in there. Not the romance. The romance is totally made up, but the details, like the apartment that she lives in is the apartment where we borrowed an apartment from a friend for the first few weeks as we were getting settled and finding our own place. And she has a really strong friendship with this woman, Veronica. And these friendship, I made a lot of friends with people from around the world, and these friendships are really intense because we're all going through the same thing, which is figuring out how to mesh what we think life looks like with what's actually going on in this new country where things are done differently. So I really wanted to write a story about someone who is exploring Stockholm and exploring those things and what it means to live there while she's falling in love. So that's really kind of how I approached that book. Publishing it, that was really so I wrote it, and then I joined my local Romance Writers of America chapter, the San Francisco Bay chapter, which is no longer exists. And everyone there told me how to do it. So, so that was it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did the world of romance publishing look like at the time you were entering into it?
So it was certainly easier to sell books without advertising. I entered at the tail end of what I would call the indie gold rush, or not I would call that. That's sort of what it's known as. And Facebook was really at the center of connecting with readers, and the contemporary market was flooded at that point. But there were still so many ways to connect with readers who would maybe enjoy my particular kind of book, even though I really did not know what I was doing. Like I said, I got tips from.
I love this so much. I feel like that would be us, Aaron. We're just putting books out there, okay? But we have no idea what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it really felt like that. And it was fun that way for me because I didn't enter it. My dream was to write a romance, to write a book. And everything after that. And I try to remind myself of this when I, get down on, oh, what am I doing with my career? And anything. Really, my dream was to write. And so all of this other stuff that came with it and discovering the world that you could connect with readers. And that was all just sort of icing on the cake for me at first. It was a period of discovery. In retrospect, it would have been better if I knew more about business and stuff like that. I was not the best business person, and I didn't really know how to ride the wave. how to hang on to it. But it's hard to think that I should change, like to go back and change that, just because there was such a feeling of possibility, and it was very uplifting in that way. So yeah.
Well, do you remember the moment, like you said that I just wanted to write, which I
Mm,
think for a lot of us aspiring writers, that's it. Like you just want to write. You just want to do the thing. Do you
mm.
remember the first time when it hit you like, oh, but there's a business aspect to this too?
Yeah, that was, well, I guess, querying agents was a little bit of a wake-up call, and having the rejections were a wake-up call.
I can
Um,
definitely see that being, part of it.
but it really was after I published. I mean, really figuring out like, oh, I don't know how to reach readers. Okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try like going on, Goodreads giveaways, or, there were at the time, I mean, there still are a bunch of Facebook groups, the reader groups. But at the time, there were a few of them were really big and going on there, and people would just buy books at the time because it wasn't as flooded as it now, so as it is now. So you could go on to like One Click Addicts and put your book out there and talk about it, and people would buy it. Like now, it doesn't really work quite that, it's not that streamlined at this
Yeah.
point.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it really was after I really discovered it, I think after I published, and after I started realizing like, oh, and people expect me to write another one, like right now.
That is definitely part of the package.
I'm not really selling myself as a businesswoman here.
I think it's great. It's fine. We have to talk about Best Laid Plans. You released it in
Mm.
2018. It was your first Harlequin Dare. Tell us about your journey to getting published with Harlequin.
Yeah, that was it was a little crazy. So I didn't really know anything. This is a theme, of course, as you're hearing. I didn't really know anything about category romance. There was like they used to have this thing called So You Think You Can Write, and it was like I don't know, it was a contest that they had where you could just submit to category lines. And of course, I didn't understand what category lines were. So I just like threw out my Stockholm Diaries Caroline thing when I was wondering what to do with it. And it was, of course, like completely ignored because it doesn't fit category at all. Like, single perspective, like all these problems with it. Problems like, for it not matching. And I never really thought that much about it until Kathleen Scheibling, who's one of the head editors at Harlequin. She came to the my chapter of the Romance Writers America. She came to a meeting and she did this presentation on it. And all of the lines, I was like, yeah, I don't really write any of that stuff. And then she described this new, yet to be named line that featured international settings, high heat, and then millionaires. And I was like, ooh, I think I could write that. And coincidentally, my name was chosen for a pitch session with her. There was like a big lottery. And I, still not understanding category very well, pitched the story I was currently writing, which is in the Stockholm Diaries world. And it had some of the elements. So it's a real book. It's a book that I did write. It's called One More Night. But if you ever read it, you will see that it's clearly not category romance. But I had this pitch session, so I tried to fit it into what they wanted. So I was like, the hero, it's international, it's high heat, and the hero is an author and a millionaire. And and Kathleen just like cracked up and she said something like, well, he didn't make his millions as an author, did he? No, of course not. so so but she said, like, just to be nice, I think she said, oh, well, send me a chapter. But I knew that's not what she wanted, clearly, because she had laughed. but I had this open door. So then I scrapped that idea, I put that aside, and then I came up with something new. That was the premise for Best Laid Plans. And I wrote a chapter and sent it in, and she wanted 3 chapters, and then she wanted a full, and then they bought it. So it was I kind of fell into it, I guess.
Well, congratulations. We're glad that you made it.
I know.
Thank you. It seems like against all odds, because I really didn't know what I was doing. But I think I do know what I'm doing now, a little more.
Well, for anyone that has yet to read a Harlequin Dare, how would you describe the line to them?
So they're really fun, right? They're high heat, international, cosmopolitan settings, aspirational lifestyle type things, but more down to earth relationships and people than something like Presents. So I think that it's got a lot of the same hooks as Presents, but more what I'll call contemporary and higher heat.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, while you were writing for Dare, like, what did the marketing promotion like, how did you get readers to pick up the book?
That is a good question. I have been listening to your discussions with different authors. Jadasola James was speaking on the podcast a few weeks ago about the marketing and just like looking at the different what these different lines do. And I honestly, I try to look back because I entered, one of the reasons why I wanted to go traditional as opposed to indie was I was realizing that I wasn't the world's best marketer. And so I needed help with this. But I think that the focus was of Dare was really to appeal to the international market. It was really not a huge North American focus. So I did some of my own stuff. I had a newsletter and stuff, but really I was trying to look at what they were doing. And Dare launched in 2018, and the market was really flooded with high heat contemporaries. And I didn't really understand how they were marketing it either because I wasn't seeing it. I'm sure that it was advertised to Harlequin's established base, but it didn't have the regular category covers. Like if you look at the cover of Best Laid Plans, like it just has Dare in the corner in these, you don't know that it's Harlequin at all, and you
You
definitely don't know
don't,
that it's
yeah.
category. It was presented much more like a single title. And then here in the US, it was only online. I mean, I totally understand why Harlequin as a business decision, but as like, as an author, I would like I would have liked it to be as in paperback. And I do understand there's a lot of problems with high heat books on the shelves, and you really need but if you're going to make it work, you need a great online marketing game. And Jadasola mentioned that Harlequin is adaptable and always figures that out. And I totally agree. They've really done an amazing job with this. They're super savvy. But I think in 2018, they hadn't fully mastered the online marketing and Amazon, and books get lost there. And I don't feel like in the US, the line really took off in part because of that.
Yeah, this is really you made me really think about something I don't think that we have thought about, Erin, when we talk about Dare. Like maybe it was like possibly geared more towards readers overseas. Maybe I don't know. That's such a really good point because I think you're missing a huge mark when you don't allow a certain location to buy them physically. And I mean, I think there's the hope of like our already established readers will buy into this, but you should also want to try to get new readers. But if it's out of sight, out of mind, they're not even going to know it's there. I hope
Yeah.
like that makes some kind of sense. Yeah.
And I think, there are markets that Dare did do really well in, but they're, like, for example, in the Swedish market, which is totally coincidental, but it's a good one for me to do well in because it's close to my heart. But they're like the Dare line is still publishing books there. I mean, not new books, but they are still publishing translations of the line. And my books are in audio there. Like they
Are
really,
you serious?
Oh,
I
wow.
know. Isn't that crazy? So I think that, so, Harlequin's business, it's centered around the North American market and category, but a lot of the business focus is also on selling to these foreign markets. So like the foreign markets themselves this has been explained to me, and I hope I'm getting it right, but they're sort of their own entities. So they decide which things do well there. And so we, as tropes, when we were writing, there were things like, I think, like, not military heroes, not police, things that do not do well in overseas markets, but maybe do better here. And so there were markets. They were hoping the international market would really take off. And there were some places that it did, and then other places that it didn't. Like I said, Sweden did, but the books are in, I think for Germany, they translated them for a while, but that's ended. I just got Lithuania. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And I know that, like, I got one in French, and I didn't get them in Italian and Spanish, but there were some in Italian and Spanish. So I think that was really what the vision was this was going to make it. And it's one of the reasons why they were willing to sacrifice the North American print market for it. I've thought a lot about the question that you have been asking other authors, like, what do you think? Why do you think some of these lines haven't made it? And I was really curious about Giada answer about the promise, like a very specific promise of the line. And I gave you what I thought Harlequin Dare was, what they were aiming for. But I'm not sure if that promise was specific enough, and to really catch people's eye, especially when the books were competing against the Amazon top 100, like High Heat with cosmopolitan or luxury settings, like, half Amazon top 100 is that.
Is
So
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
so really trying to figure out, well, what does Dare have that you cannot reliably find elsewhere? I mean, I think that's what Presents does really well. That's what Love Inspired Suspense does really well. Like, you can't find exactly what they're doing anywhere else reliably.
Else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because we know that, I mean, we don't know what it's called, but we know there is an unnamed imprint in the works, and we have
Yeah,
questions. We wonder, is this going to be another High Heat line? And one thing Erin and I have been talking about a lot offline and on the podcast is like, if we're going to do it again, how do we do it and do it right? Because if you're going to do it again and it's going to be digital only, well, that was what happened with Dare. And here in the States, it kind of felt like it was doomed to begin with by
yeah,
doing that. But also, I mean, we all three live in the States. Let's be real. The last time you went to Walmart, what Harlequin lines did you see on the shelf? You
right.
probably wouldn't see a Blaze or a Dare on the shelf at the Walmart in the United States. So it's like, we're interested to see how it rolls out. Like, what do you think, as someone that wrote for this line, which I think it's so interesting, if you're writing for a line that you're not going to see on the shelves where you live. I always find that so fascinating how authors do that. Like, you're writing a book for a line that is really trying to be pushed somewhere else because like, for whatever reason it's not here. But like, what do you think, what do we do differently this time to ensure whatever's coming down the pipeline has the potential to be successful?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the $1 million question that Harlequin's trying to figure out. I mean, for me personally, I was writing indie before. And so I wasn't as, it didn't feel like a step back to not have my books on the shelves, because my indie books were not on the shelves either. my, my orientation was online, ebooks. Contemporary is a super, super hot market. I mean, I understand that it has ebbs and flows, but it is the biggest market. And I think High Heat, there are people who are buying, again, if you just look at the Amazon top 100, it's High Heat contemporary. So there are people who are buying it. And I think, and I'm pretty sure this is not an official thing, but I'm pretty sure that the new yet to be named line is Higher Heat and is paperback. I think that they are looking for shelf space. And so I think one of the answers has got to be about covers that suit Walmart frankly. Like they have to be able to fit on those shelves. And I don't know exactly what that is. I don't think I even have a Walmart near me, so I'm not sure what those shelves look like. Um, maybe I do, but it's not anywhere very close, and I tend not to drive, so um, maybe I do. It should fit on that, and I think it needs to be, so it needs to go over well. They need to be able to sell it to the Harlequin base. And I think they really, with Dare, they really wanted new readers and they wanted younger readers. And which I think is a really good idea, but it has to have an intersection with people who are already reading Harlequin. Now, who is reading Harlequin right now in 2022 and who was reading it in 2017 when they were conceiving, or 2016 when they were conceiving of this line, has shifted. So that could be a factor too. I'm curious to hear what you two think. Like, what would you want this line to do?
I just want to see it. I mean, I'm a Dare fan, and it's just, I look at Temptation, you look at Blaze, they had these really long runs, and then
Mm,
you see Dare, and it didn't last nearly as long. I mean, not nearly as many books, and it's like, well, what happened? So it's sad to see it go, but I mean, lines come and go. I think if you're a category reader, you just kind of get used to it. But there are those lines that are so definite. I mean, romance is the oldest line. It's been around for forever, it feels like. And then you have presents. So it's like it is possible to get it right.
yeah,
I think that I hate to go there, but like there are just some parts of North America that are so conservative almost that it's like they're not going to want those books on the shelf at Walmart. So then you have
right.
to hope you can get them in Barnes and Noble. And I don't know. I think part of what we're trying to do with the podcast too is just how do you get those new readers? One thing Jade Sola James said in the interview with her was for the longest it was keeping the readers you already have, but
Right.
also trying to figure out how to get new readers. And that's something Aaron and I have talked about is like, how do you get new people to jump on board? But I feel like that's going to be key.
Yeah. I think that I'm hoping, I think that the more new authors that they bring in that have
Yes.
established bases that really don't even intersect that much with Harlequin, I think that, like, now that you're saying that, I think that would be that's an important factor.
We got to get Katie Robert back to write another category.
Basically.
I think she's moved on from category at this point.
I know.
Yeah.
People are shocked when you're like, oh, Katie Robert wrote for Dare. She wrote for Entangled. They're like, she wrote categories? Yes. They were really good.
I know.
Well, one thing, I don't know if it would help in the marketing, but one thing I would love to see again is the painted covers. Like I love the Temptation covers.
Yeah.
They are just so special. And it's probably not the key to success there, but I think it would be awesome to see some painted covers again.
I do think
Ooh,
readers want that. I do think there's, a big group in romance readers that like miss those days. I
yes.
mean, in a way, it was kind of illustrated, right? Like everybody loves illustrated covers.
Right? Yeah.
And there were some late Kamani books that had some illustrative. I feel like one of Cheryl Lister's, maybe I think it's hers, that had just this gorgeous sort of like tropical scene. I hope I'm getting the author right. I'm not sure if it's hers, but it had this tropical scene, but it was illustrated stylistically. It was beautiful. So they can
Yeah.
do that.
As well, it would be kind of cool to see Harlequins like at the checkout stand. I
Yeah.
always think when I'm at the checkout stand looking at like the celebrity magazines and stuff there, I'm like, why can't there just be a shelf of the categories that's just right above all of those? They just fit so perfectly. And honestly, they'd probably get me every time I went to the grocery store at that checkout. I was like, well, I might as well just grab this one.
Well, and I think that's probably Harlequin's, that's their first choice too, I'm sure. If they can get that, that's cool. I'm sure they're trying to push for that. But there's, they're not the only people who are pushing for that space. So
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's prime real estate. Yeah.
it is
Look,
because,
if
yeah,
Miss Debbie Macomber has a book, it's gonna be there. Okay, we have to fight with Debbie Macomber. Nora Roberts backlist. But I mean, especially like, okay, put the new unnamed imprint at the Walmart by the self checkout, so nobody's none the wiser that you're buying it. If it's that big of a deal,
Yeah.
just put it in the self checkout line.
right,
Well,
right.
yeah, and I had a Walmart in a city I lived nearby, went totally self checkout. It was 99% self checkout except for the customer service counter.
Wow, that's
Yeah, I mean,
crazy. You could do like guerrilla, get in there and just just do it for a try. Don't tell anyone. Just bring your rack.
Well, your final Dare novel, Pure Satisfaction, was book number 140 in the line before it closed just a little over 20 books after. When you released Pure Satisfaction, were you aware that Dare would be closing?
I was. I feel like we found out the spring of that year. And like it was, of course, we were really sad. I could tell that the numbers were not going in the right direction. So it wasn't a complete shock. It was also at the very beginning of the pandemic. So there was a lot going on. So it was, it felt like it. I don't think it was related to the pandemic per se, but maybe I don't know if they sped it up because it was because books were not being sold, like bookstores were closed anyway. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, we knew beforehand.
well, the book was also a Vivian Award winner. So, can you tell us what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. So that was a strange and kind of mixed experience for me. So obviously, like on the one hand, I was so thrilled by this honor. I'm someone who often rewrites the beginnings of my books multiple times, but the first three chapters of this one really flowed out of me. Ruby and Adrian were just so much fun to write, and it had all these elements that I love, like it's grumpy versus sunshine, enemies to lovers, age gap, forbidden. It takes place in Hawaii. And this book came out during the pandemic. So the fact that this book brought people some respite, maybe during this tough time, that was very special. And the other finalist, Nikki Sloan, she's a super talented author, and she had a bigger profile than I do. So I kind of just assumed the award was going to go to her, and I was genuinely surprised. Like there's the speeches somewhere on YouTube, and it's very clear that I'm happy and very overwhelmed as but there's another dimension. So I was not on Twitter at the time, and I had heard, but I had still heard some rumblings about the inspirational romance from Bethany House that had finaled, that starts out with a soldier killing people at the Wounded Knee Massacre. And I was familiar with another book that had finaled in this category a few years before, and it featured a Nazi officer and a Jewish woman captive in a concentration camp. So the inspirational category itself had developed a reputation for lifting up problematic characters. And so after my win, I celebrated with my family. I wasn't tuned into the book that won the inspirational category until the next day. And I got on social media, and I had an evening of private celebration, and that felt good, but there were larger things at stake than my personal win. I felt like people should be talking about harmful content in romance, and there's no better time than when it makes the news. So I think that the people who overhauled the judging from the Rita to the Vivian, they worked hard, but it wasn't enough. And so I guess when I think about the win, both things exist. I'm proud of the book that I wrote, and I'm really honored to have won. But the feeling is intertwined with the sadness about the harm the contest brought. So that was kind of a
Yeah.
long answer.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are excited to learn that you will be making a return to category romance writing, and that we will be getting a 2023 release from you. What can you tell us about it?
So after my last answer, And the fact that I wrote for Dare, this will probably come as a shock. But I did write something for Harlequin's inspirational romantic suspense line. And this kind of has a little story behind it. So after Dare, I submitted to Presents and Desire, but neither took my things. Neither took my ideas, they're not fabulous matches for me either. So I just sort of moved on, and I was writing other things. But last December, Katie Gowrie, who's my Dare editor, and she's fantastic. I love her. She contacted me and told me about a project under the inspirational romantic suspense line, and did I want to submit a proposal? And so, obviously, with all the things that I just talked about, I had to think about it. I was extra sensitive about what story I wanted to tell in this genre. But I love Katie and I trust her as an editor. And there were these three things that they wanted. They wanted either canines or cold case or mountain rescue. And when I heard
Yeah.
mountain rescue, I was like, ooh. I've always wanted to write like stranded in the snowy mountains story, and like you're
I feel like those
you
3 things are huge. I knew you were gonna say cold case, and I knew you were gonna say K9, and then you said mountain, and I was like, "Yep, those 2. That's
Yeah.
it. All 3 of them."
Yes, and I can like feel the appeal of for me, like the mountain rescue, like anything that has mountain rescue. I'm like, oh yes, I want to read that. Trapped in there and like in a blizzard. So I pitched this second chance romance in the Tahoe Mountains during a blizzard, which I don't know if you have ever visited that area, but I think it's the snowiest city in the U.S. or maybe the lower 48. It's nuts. The snow is like 10 feet high. So it's really crazy in there.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so this couple who get together after, who see each other after a long time, or there's a whole they have cabins next to each other, and she's up there, and a turn of events means she has to turn to him, and there's some running away, there's some jumping off cliffs and hiding in caves. It was really fun to write. So it's called High Stakes Blizzard, and it's under a brand new pen name, which is Rebecca Hopewell.
Yeah, I was
Yay.
going to ask about that because I spoke to Kim Finley recently, who writes for Heartwarming and Love
Mm.
Inspired, and they almost didn't catch that she wrote some steamier stuff under Kim Finley, and she had to mention it for them to assign the pen name. So I was curious if you got one as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I asked, I actually, when I was looking at doing this, I asked Lisa Child, who's a just long, long time Harlequin writer. She's written over 100 books. And I asked her, because she's written it all under the same name, but she only writes for Harlequin, but she just like switches lines. And I was okay. So she wrote one of these. She wrote for this inspirational romantic suspense, but she also wrote, she wrote for Dare. That's how I knew her. She writes for romantic suspense now, I think. And I don't know, she writes a ton of stuff. But I asked her, and she doesn't really, she said, readers will pick up what they want. But then I talked to someone else who who's writing under Zoe Marie Jackson for her inspirational romance, and she chose a different pen name for that reason, and said readers do care. If they don't want to pick up a book, they don't want to like go to your bookshelf and then find Dares there also. So I was sort of weighing those two opinions, and I went with the new pen name.
Well, let's get into some round out questions. The first one, last and next. Tell us one of your most recent reads and a book you hope to pick up next.
So I usually read a lot of romances, but right now, neither of those are romances. So my nonfiction, I just did a nonfiction which was called How to Do Nothing, How to Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. And it was It was really good. It was the right book for me right now. And so I put it, I finished it and I was really inspired and just thinking about a lot of stuff. But I don't know if this happens to you guys, but like when I have a book like that, then I have a really hard time picking up a new book.
Yeah.
So last night I took one of my break in case of emergency books off my shelf.
Oh my gosh, what
Oh yeah.
is it?
So Louise Erdrich is my very favorite author. And she's a literary fiction author, but she writes relationships that are so good. Like it's very, very character driven. I don't know if you've ever read any of her books. But I do this weird thing where when I love an author, I actually don't read a lot of their books because I want them on my break in case of emergency.
Yeah.
So I have two books on my shelf that are hers that I haven't read, and one that I haven't read in like so long it's basically new. So I took down the Bingo Palace and I'm starting it.
I love that you said that because now I'm thinking of like some of the shelves on like some of the books on my shelves, and I'm like, yeah, I did read all this author's books, and now I have nothing. So you like literally just have to wait until they decide to put something else out. And I'm not the biggest rereader, so I think we all need a break in case. Like it's okay, have a break in case, friends. Have a break in
Mhm.
case.
But
Yeah.
there's a
Don't eat
lot of
that whole
joy.
box of cookies.
There's also a lot of joy though in like once you've read one of the author's books and you're like, oh, I want more of this. So it's hard to
Yeah.
resist sometimes.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Well, ebook, audiobook, physical copy. What's your preferred reading method?
I am paperback all the way.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, I do read online. Even if I start reading something online and I love it, I'll actually just go and buy the paperback because I just enjoy it more. It's weird. I don't know.
Well, tell
Yeah.
us one book you wouldn't mind the experience of reading again for the first time.
This is hard. There are a lot of those. But I'm going to go with Flowers from the Storm by Laura Kinsale.
Ooh.
It is a historical. It was written a long time ago. A long time ago, meaning maybe the
That
early
sounds like an
2000s.
older historical. Yeah.
um, and it features a duke that has a stroke and ends up in an institution. And it is super, I mean, it is beautifully done. Just and it really what I love about it is it's not a historical that glorifies the social system at all at the time. Like you see how everyone is kind of trapped in these different places, including this duke, and this position that he's been put in, and how everyone is maneuvering around him to gain power. So it's fantastic.
I feel like those old school historicals like really just went there and got away with so much that I just don't think you would see in historicals that come out today.
Yeah. Well, and you can find a lot of grittier historicals, I mean, it feels just the tone is different. I have to say that I do like search Goodreads for content warnings because there are things I don't want to read. So I want to make sure those things aren't in it because you have to it's kind of threading the needle with old romance, old historical romance too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the right one really hits the spot for me.
And some of those books were doorstops. They were big books, so you definitely want to know what what you're getting into before you invest in them.
Yes, this one is a doorstop too. This is a big one.
Well, you decide you want takeout for dinner tonight. Where do you order from, and what's your order?
This is a hard question. I live in a super foodie area, so we have lots of great restaurants that are within walking distance. But I'm going to go with Cafe Raj. And I would order the saag paneer, which is like this spinach dish with paneer cheese in it. And then they give you a free rice pudding with that too. So I'd eat that too.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so good.
Sounds wonderful.
I know. And I love that you live in a foodie area like that. Just sounds like such a dream. I want to be surrounded by a bunch of good food. Okay, this may be hard because we know you are a woman with very strong opinions. What is one hill you will wholeheartedly die on?
Yeah. So fresh water for everyone. I,
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be stuff like that. And that, I think that the hill, I mean, most people agree on things like that. But it's like the place that I can get a little, hill to die on is like, where should we be taking resources to put towards things like that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Tell us one of the toughest pieces of advice you've ever received.
You have to spend way more money to get results from book releases.
Oh my gosh.
It's so painful because I feel like I have thrown away a lot of money at like, ooh, this sounds kind of interesting kind of things. And I'm a little wary. And so I'm not a big risk taker. And that is not rewarded these days in publishing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, knowing what you know now, what advice would you go back and give yourself at the beginning of your writing career?
So I think that the person I really want to give advice to is my 20-year-old self. So at that time, even back then, I wanted to write a novel. I really wanted to. I started different things, and then I'd start it and I'd be like, yeah, this isn't good enough. And so at some point, I quit to wait until I got good enough. So, like, saying this aloud, you can hear this does not make sense. Like, you can't wait to get good enough. So, what was I thinking? And if I had maybe voiced those things to someone else, maybe someone else would have said, like, Rebecca, what are you thinking? But I didn't. And so I waited. And I would say, don't wait, just do it.
Excellent advice. We should take that advice, Brie.
I know. Absolutely. Just do it. And then we'll just have like all these reasons. But like I can't do it right now.
Soon. Well, I when I was 20, I had that thought. And then when I was like in my mid 30s and I was getting close to 40, and I was like, I had this thought, that I periodically came up that I want to write a novel. And then I was like, oh, if I'd only started when I was 20, then I would be so good right now, right? And then my next thought was like, oh, but it's too late now. And then luckily, then my next thought after that was like, wait a minute. If you're 60 and you look back at this moment right here, you're going to say the same thing, that you should have started then. And that was the piece that like pushed me over the edge. I was like, it's never, if I look at that span of time, even if I write a mediocre book right now, by the time I'm 60, I'll write a good book. So yeah.
Well, lastly, where can everyone keep up with you online?
Well, I do send out a monthly newsletter, which I love to write. So that's a good place to start. And you can get it if you go to my website, which is RebeccaHunterWriter.com. You can sign up there. And I think the social media that I update the most is Instagram, and I'm Rebecca Hunter Writer there too. So I think those are the best places. But I think I'm everywhere.
Well, we will find all the places and put them in the show notes so that listeners can keep up with you. And do you have a month for the new release for next year or no? Is it too early?
I do have a month, and a lovely cover. It is March. It's the March 2023. I think the official release day is maybe like the 1st of February, but I think if it'll be on shelves everywhere in March next year.
Well, we'll try to find links and put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today and letting us pick your brain. We have just been so excited. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.